Welcome to this IUN Community Garden Winter Sowing Workshop. My name is Amanda. I am the Assistant Director of the Center for Urban and Regional Excellence. It is my pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Dolly Foster. Dolly has been a master gardener for 20 years, an Indiana accredited horticulturalist for 18 years, and a certified arborist since 2008. For the past 20 years, Dolly has been presenting lectures on many garden topics. She spent 4 years as an adjunct faculty member at the Joliet Junior College Agriculture/Horticulture Department. She has been winter sowing for nearly a decade, using it as a method to reliably start native plants. Dolly, we're very glad to have you with us today. Thank you.
Winter sowing is such an intriguing way to start seeds. One thing I want to make clear to you is that just because you are growing flowers, perennials, annuals, perennials, and vegetables in these jugs, and you're starting these jugs in December through February, this does not mean that you're going to get vegetables earlier, and this does not mean that you are going to get flowers earlier, because these plants are going to go into the ground at their regular time when they're supposed to go in the ground. You know, your peppers aren't going to come on earlier, your tomatoes aren't going to come on earlier. It's going to all be in the normal time frame. This is a great method for hardy annuals and half-hardy annuals. And what are those plants? So you don't have to have lights and shelves in your house. You don't have to have pots and trays. You don't have to go out and buy pots and trays. You do not have to save pots and trays. You don't have damping off. You're not going to have weeds in your plants. You're going to have less frequent watering. I'm not going to say it's a much more regulated process, but there is just less input. You're still going to have to water your jugs, but it's going to be less input. And then you do not have to harden off your plants. Starting your seeds indoors, even with starting seeds in my greenhouse at work, I still had to harden those plants off, which means you have to take them indoors and outdoors and indoors and outdoors for 2 weeks to get them used to the strong sun, to get them used to the outdoor temperatures, things like that. And then your seeds germinate naturally when they're supposed to germinate, when nature tells them to germinate, which is a really big advantage. And then they're going to transplant faster into the ground, and they're going to not go through as much transplant shock because they're going to have really good root systems developed already. When you do this, you can start planting anywhere from the winter solstice, which is mid to late December, all the way through to the beginning of March. And I usually take that time and use all of that time to make my jugs, because I'm making a lot of jugs. Then they are going to be done in groups. So I do my hardiest, cold hardy native plants first. I'll do those in December and January. February I do another group of 20 or 30 jugs, and then I'll do another jugs set at the end of March, and that's going to be all my annuals. There are gardeners out there who just sow everything. They sow every single one of their jugs in January and February. They do it all one day. That includes vegetables, and that's just fine. So this is a very, very flexible gardening practice that has very few rules that you have to really pay attention to. So January and February, if you're going to do the schedule like I usually do, anything that is a perennial in our temperate climate is going to be able to be sown in January and February. You can plant all your natives January and February. Annuals that can be planted just a little bit later. All of those things that are just a little bit more tender, but we still consider them cold hardy annuals. And then at this time of the year, you can start planting your vegetables for cold season, your cold season vegetables. So spinach and lettuce, kale, Brussels sprouts, snow peas, broccoli, all those kind of things that can take the cold. Those can go into your jugs first. And then in March, half-hardy annuals and tender annuals are going to include things like Mexican sunflower, which is Tithonia, cosmos and zinnia, marigolds, 4 o'clocks, tropical milkweed. All of those are really, really good pollinator plants that if you are growing vegetables and you're going to put these out into a vegetable garden, having some pollinator plants in with your vegetables is really good, because you get better yield on your vegetables. Vegetables that you can start a little bit more into March are going to be more of those tender things like bok choy and other Chinese cabbages, beets and snow peas, cabbage. You can put lettuce in at this time, or you can put lettuce in when it's a little colder. But if you're going to do things like peppers and basil and tomatoes, I would wait until April for those. For me, if I was going to be growing peppers, I would prefer to grow my peppers inside because they do need a lot of heat. They need the warmth. And they're going to be a little bit stronger of a plant. But there's no reason why you can't do some experimentation. So these are some things that you will need, like some scissors, some tough scissors. These are like those chicken scissors that you get at the kitchen store, dollar store. You need a box cutter. You're going to need something to use as a plant tag, and actually plastic knives work really well. Having a good marker to put labels in is important. You're going to need things like a sharp small knife, like a utility knife is fine, a ruler for the very first time you do this, and soil. That's about it. So, and coffee filters are helpful too, and I'll explain that in a minute. So really, this is a lot of household materials that you probably have at home. Duct tape is going to be helpful for closing the jugs up when you're done loading it all up with your seeds and soil. But there's lots of choices of containers. You do not just have to use 1 gallon jugs. By any stretch of the imagination, you can use the big ice cream tubs, you can use food containers. Down here is a small 1 pint soup container. Now there's not a lot of head space in here for this. But what you can do is, if you're going to start something that's going to stay small for a little bit of time, like lettuce, you can start something like lettuce in here or some other kind of greens. And then you know that as soon as that is up and it's sprouted and it's got some leaves on it, you're going to put them out in the garden immediately. A colored jug is okay. As long as sunlight can get through that jug, the seeds will germinate. What you don't want is a completely solid white plastic jug. Another thing that I saw was a gardener using a blanket bag. What they did was they made a frame that fit their blanket bag and then put some slits in the bottom for drainage and a few on the top for venting the heat out. So whatever container you use, it has to have drainage holes in the bottom and it has to have vent holes on the top. So you just have to attach it to the inside of the frame. But it works really well, I think. You can use bags. You can use 1 gallon food bags, like hefty bags, Ziploc bags, those kind of things. Other than that, you can use 2-liter bottles, you can use juice jugs, you can use water jugs, you can use milk jugs, you can use just about anything you want. Potting soil. Let's talk about potting soil for a minute. Any type of potting soil is going to do, but there are some things that I avoid when I'm choosing potting soil for this method. One of the things that I mostly avoid is potting soil that's made out of black soil, because it's just a little too heavy and they don't put enough perlite in it. Seed starting mix is another type of potting soil that is too light for this method. It's too airy, it doesn't have enough of the bark and tree branch pieces in it that actually hold on to moisture and hold on to air. It doesn't have enough perlite in it either, in my opinion. But if you are out shopping for soil and the only soil that the store that you're at has is added fertilizer in the soil, go ahead and buy it and go ahead and use it. It's not going to hurt anything. There's no reason to avoid it. Just know that your seedlings don't really need fertilizer until they get transplanted. And then probably the most important thing for our region, for where we live with the type of winters that we have, avoid the soil that has the water polymer crystals in it. You know, the crystals that hold water. We don't want that here in this area for our seedlings and for our seeds over the winter, because the soil will be way too wet and then our seeds will rot. So we don't want that. And then don't use last year's potting soil out of your big planter pots or out of your raised garden or anything like that, because most likely there's some kind of nasty fungal bug in there, or insect or algae or something. One important reminder about making multiple jugs is that not all of your jugs are going to germinate at the same time. So you might go out at the end of March and see a couple of things germinated and you get really, really excited. And then you move over to the next jug and you see that that one's not germinated. Oh, what did I do wrong? This one's not germinated. All seeds germinate at their own time in this seed starting method. Don't be disappointed if you do go all the way through to the middle of May. You're getting ready to open all your jugs. You're getting ready to plant things out in the garden, and you still have a couple of jugs that haven't germinated. Just open those jugs up. Make sure there's a tag in the inside so you know what plant it is. And then just treat that jug as if it was a small flower pot. Keep it in the sun, keep it watered, and those seeds should germinate eventually. Okay, so let's go over the steps in this. First of all, if you have a milk jug or a jug like your vinegar jug, I also use jugs that have windshield wiper fluid. You have to clean those out. So cleaning with hot and soapy water is probably all you're going to need. And then let them dry out for a day or so, because if I don't let my jugs dry out, then I'm cutting these jugs open and there's just water droplets everywhere, all over the living room, all over the kitchen. So let them dry out for a day before you cut them. The first thing that you want to do is you want to put drainage holes in the bottom. So what I do is I just use a paring knife. This is just a cheapy little paring knife that I found at the dollar store, I think. I mean, it was really cheap. And all I do is wiggle a little bit, and I cut a little slit in to the plastic, and then I come and do it again right next to it, and I make a V. I take the tip of the knife and I bend it in, and then I have a drainage hole. Okay, so if this is the very first time that you're doing this, you're going to need a large rubber band and a ruler. And you put the rubber band around your jug. And I made little rulers for you guys to use today. This is a 6-inch ruler, but you want to measure to 4 inches, which is right about there. And you draw a line around so that you know where to cut, because we have to cut this thing open. So with your using jugs like this, you want to keep the handle intact. So we're going to cut this in a way that we're going to end up with a hinge right behind the handle. And this will help us to carry them around later after we put them all back together and tape them back together. So take your paring knife again. You're going to put it in right next to the handle, but not into the handle. So it just wants to be right next to the handle, so you're not cutting into it. And I usually just cut a little bit of a straight line with my knife, and then with my kitchen scissors, I just cut the rest of it. But when you're done cutting, you have that hinge, and you should be able to open this up like a clamshell, like one of those clamshell food containers. You can pinch it so it stays open, and then when we load it all up and get ready to put it outside, we just close it back up. Then, because I have slugs in my yard, I use a coffee filter in the bottom of all my jugs. And you just basically stretch it down in there. It's going to get wet and it's going to conform to the shape of the bottom of your jug. But the reason for the coffee filter is to keep slugs from getting in through the holes and eating your seedlings once your seedlings grow. Also, when you're carrying this around, it keeps the potting soil in. Okay, so when it comes to your potting soil, you need to make sure that your potting soil is not dry, but you want it moist, but you don't want it soggy. You know that there's an in-between there somewhere. So right now they just need moist soil. And when I put my soil into the containers, what I do is I fill up almost to this line, and then I take my fingers and I stick my fingers down in there and get some of the air out. And we used to do this in my greenhouse too. And what this does is it gives you a little bit more room to add a little bit more soil in. And then after you do that, when you're watering later on, the soil doesn't collapse and you don't end up with just like 1 or 2 inches of soil. A 1-gallon container takes about 8 cups of potting soil. So if you are going to do a lot of containers, that's a way that you can calculate how much soil you actually need. Okay, use a plant label inside the container once you decide what you're going to put into this container. Again, we're going to use little plastic knives today and our UV marker, the garden marker, and then we tape. So when I go to tape up a container, jug or whatever it is, whichever one I'm using, I will pull off a little bit of tape. I usually just pull off just like a little square, and I put it on the corner of the jug to start with, just to keep it held tight. And then I'll cut 2 pieces of duct tape to put around one side and the other side. And then how many seeds is too many seeds? Okay, that is an issue. It's obviously an issue for me because I do it every year. These are hollyhock seeds in this photo, and this was hollyhock seeds that I sowed, I don't know, a couple years ago. And there was a lot of seedlings in that jug, and I just laid it out from end to end. There was seeds, end to end. But you really don't want to do this unless you're going to be transplanting very, very quickly. So for me, potting these up for like a plant sale for work or using for work for our flower gardens or whatever, that's practical for me to do. But if this was going to only be for me, I don't need 150 hollyhock seeds to germinate for my garden, but I could probably do with 10 or 20. So you put how many seeds in there that you need for the application that you're using this for, whether it be vegetables or flowers or whatever. These are sunflower seeds that I put on their side. I stood them up on their side. And the reason for that is big seeds like sunflowers and pumpkins and squash seeds, cucumber seeds, they can rot if they're just laying on their backs. So you stand them on their side and they germinate a lot better. You just want your seeds to be spaced out. It doesn't have to be in rows. It doesn't have to be regimented. You don't have to count. There's not a lot of demands there. Just make sure that each seed has a little bit of space so that you can transplant it later. Probably the only piece of information that you're going to use off of a seed package is going to be how much soil to put over your seeds. So labeling your jug, you can tape this thing up. You can write on the tape the name of your plant. You can write the name of your plant on the top of the jug. Make sure there's a label inside. I cannot say that enough. And there are reasons why you want to label containers well. So you can use plastic spoons, plastic knives. You can buy plastic tags for plants. But I find the plastic knives just as easy, and they're nice and cheap. They're a lot cheaper. So this is why labeling containers is so important. If you're doing 100 or 50 or even 20 containers, if you don't have them labeled really well, you don't try and depend on your memory that, I can identify all of my seedlings. There's going to be something that you're not going to be able to identify. That's just kind of Murphy's Law. This is my garden about 3 years ago. This is what I do at the beginning of May, second week of May. I open up all the containers, but I leave the top attached for a little while. And at night, what I do is I come back through and I close them back up and I just push them together, and that's enough just to keep the top on. They don't have to be resealed. Eventually, all the tops of these jugs are going to get cut off and discarded. So if this is the only place where you have the name of your plant, then you're kind of in trouble. So once you have taped, you have labeled, you have seeded, you put soil in, everything, you put them outside. This is what my jugs looked like last year. Covered with snow. Doesn't hurt them. Don't uncover them. Don't worry about them. Don't try and put them in a safe place. Just leave them where they're at. They're fine. And this is what the jugs looked like a couple of weeks later. The caps are always off. Yes, I forgot to mention that. You are going to take the caps off of your jugs, and you're never going to use the cap ever again. Okay? You're going to throw it away, recycle it, whatever you're going to do. Give it to your cat to play with. Okay, so watering containers. I typically only have to water my containers about 7 times during the summer, or the winter, 7 to 10 times. Usually it'll be a sunny day like today, but it'll be above 35 degrees. I'll go outside, I'll test the jugs. If the jug flies up in my hand, if it's light, then it needs water. If the condensation inside the jug has stopped, meaning there's no droplets of water on the top part of the jug, on this part of the jug, it needs water. What I like to do is I like to water my jugs with, do we have a jug that's not cut? Yes. I need a jug that's not cut. So what I do is I get 1 liter bottles and I put holes in the top of them just with a hot needle, like a hot sewing needle. And then how I water my jugs. Your water for your seedlings and for your seeds has to be really gentle. So a gentle spray is going to be good. And you just do it like that. Just a squeeze bottle. It is awesome. So 1 liter waters 2 jugs. And that happens 7 to 10 times per winter. So here's a photo. I know it's going to be a little bit hard to see, but this is a photo of, you can see the water droplets, you can see the condensation inside the bottles. That's what you're looking for. When that stops, that's when you water. All right, so what to expect in the next few weeks after you put everything outside. By the 3rd week of March, you should probably notice something germinating, which is most likely going to be your hardy natives or your hardy perennials. The really cold, loving plants are going to germinate the first. And then you're going to have things germinating right through straight till May. Okay. If for some reason you cannot put your jugs outside in the sun for the winter months of the year, once you start seeing them germinate, that's when they have to get to the sun. I think to put them outside, I like having them somewhere where it's more protected but sunny. But the seedlings are going to be triggered for germination by the longer days, the warmer days. The nights are getting slightly warmer. The nights are still really cold, but the days are getting a little bit warmer. And that's what really triggers them. So, jug opening day. For me, that's usually the second week of May, sometimes the third week of May, depending on the weather. And I'll bring all the jugs up onto my deck. I bring out my little footstool, my recycling containers, a good sharp knife, like my little paring knife. And I just cut through where I cut before. I just cut through the tape right there, all the way around. And then I don't take off the top yet, though. And then they just kind of all sit out there until I'm ready to transplant them, take them to work, or I'm going to put them in the garden, or whatever I'm going to do. So a little bit about fertilizer. I really don't think that you need to fertilize until you transplant. And when I do go to fertilize, whether I'm using a powder fertilizer or an organic liquid fertilizer, I always mix it half strength. So if it says 2 scoops to a 2-gallon watering can, just do 1 scoop. Let's try not to burn the roots of the little tiny plants. The most important thing I can say is that when you do go to transplant your plants, water your jugs well. Because wet soil is much easier to take apart and stays together in a hunk. And then that way you can just plant that hunk of seedlings in the ground or in a pot or wherever. The dry soil will just fall right off of the roots, and so your roots go through a little bit more stress. They go through a little bit more trauma. So keep them wet, but not soaking wet. I'd say just water them that morning before you're going to transplant, and you'll be able to pop them out. You do not have to pull things apart down to 1 seedling. Okay, even when you can also take all the seedlings out, put them on a hard table, and cut them with a knife. And that's called the brownie method. And you just cut them into little 2-inch squares, and then that is your plug that you plant up. This is how the seedlings look when I pop them up for plant sales at work and at home. Again, I don't rip these things apart down to 1 seedling. I feel like if you put 2 or 3 into a pot, then you kind of have insurance that there's going to be something there to sell, whether it's 1 or 3 seedlings. Spring sowing. If you have forgotten to plant something, or you want to do native plants, you want to do a native planting in the fall, you need plants. You have forgotten to plant some zinnias, you need some marigolds, whatever it is, and it's mid-May. What do? You do spring sowing. The only difference for spring sowing is that you're going to cut vent holes in the top of your jug along with the hole. You have extra vent holes, so the extra heat from May and June and July is going to be able to escape. That's the only difference. I keep them in a little bit more shade, keep them well watered. What do you do if you don't plant? This is habitual for me. I have jugs at home on my patio that I didn't plant last year. So what happens is you basically put them somewhere protected. You can put them in a garage, you can put them on top of other big planters like I did here. They stayed on my patio where it's nice and warm and protected. And you just plant them the next spring. And so in this case, these are all native plants. So by the time I planted them, they were 2-year-old plants, which is really good for a native. A really nice, good root system to plant. All right, some things that you're not going to winter sow. Anything that's kind of big and fleshy. So no tulips, no daffodils, no dahlias, no iris, no raspberry canes. That actually came up as a question on the Facebook page one day. Acorns, I don't think, even though they're a seed, I don't think they would do good in this. I think they would rot. And then places to find some more information. Definitely the Winter Sown Facebook page. And then the seed site is a great site to learn about seeds. And the tomclothier.hort.net is a great site to learn about seeds also. And I think that's it. So, winter sowing is super easy. Don't overthink it. A lot of people overthink it. Don't overthink it. It's so simple. Don't make it more complicated. Use materials you have around the house first. Try some new methods, try some new seeds, try experiments, like I said with the peppers, try a couple inside, try some outside. Enjoy this process, and if it is successful for you, share it with somebody else and get someone else to do it. Now, if we ever go to a truly sustainable society and we get rid of milk jugs, I don't know what we're all going to do. But until then, we can use these one more time before we recycle them. They can get used one more time. And that's it. You guys have any questions?
Perfect. Thank you.